My name is Alexandra, and I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who would one day plot revenge against her own parents. But life has a cruel way of cornering you, breaking you, until even the people who gave you life feel like strangers, monsters disguised in familiar faces. I need you to understand something before I begin. What I didn't do out of malice. I did it because I had no choice. Because the people who should have protected me, the people who should have cherished me, decided instead to spit in my face, scream in my ear, and remind me that in their eyes, I was worth nothing. It started with silence. The kind of silence that creeps into the walls of a house that no longer feels like home. When I let my parents move into my house, I thought I was doing something noble. I thought, finally, I could give back to them after years of struggle. I thought they would appreciate it, maybe even thank me for helping them in their old age. Instead, what I gave them was a stage to humiliate me, day after day, until the day they crossed the line so viciously that I swore I would never forgive. My daughter, Amelia, was the only reason I kept holding on. She was 9 years old, with eyes too wide and too innocent to understand the venom that spilled out of her grandparents' mouths. She didn't know the meaning of freeloader. She didn't understand why her grandparents slammed doors and muttered about her being a burden. But I did. And every word cut me open. I still remember the night it happened. The night the dam inside me cracked. It was late, maybe 11, and the house was thick with tension. I had been working from my laptop in the kitchen, trying to finish up a project. My parents had been sitting in the living room, watching TV like they always did, their voices echoing down the hallway, criticizing everything from my cooking to the way I raised my daughter. But then, out of nowhere, my father snapped. He came stomping down the hall like a storm, his face red, his fists clenched. My mother followed right behind, her sharp tongue ready to cut me down. I looked up, startled, my fingers frozen over the keyboard. Amelia sat at the table across from me, drawing quietly. And that's when it happened. My father leaned down, his breath hot and sour, his voice like fire. "You and your kid are just freeloaders." The words exploded into my face, spit flying, his eyes drilling into mine with such hatred I thought he was looking at a stranger. Freeloaders. In my own house. A house I bought. A house I worked for. A house I gave them because they had nowhere else to go. I froze. My chest tightened like someone had grabbed my heart with a fist. I glanced at Amelia, whose big brown eyes filled with confusion and fear. My daughter, my innocent child, who had just been branded a freeloader in her own home. And then my mother chimed in, her voice shrill, cutting. "Yes, that's right. We should have never moved in here. All you do is sit around and pretend you're some kind of savior. But you're not. You're pathetic." I couldn't breathe. It was like the walls were closing in, like the air itself had turned poisonous. I wanted to scream, to throw them out right then and there, but my throat locked up. All I could do was stare at Amelia, who looked like she was about to cry. My daughter. My reason for surviving. That was the moment something inside me shattered. Something that had been fragile for years finally broke. I looked at my parents, the people who raised me, who should have been my safety net, and all I saw were enemies. Parasites. I didn't say anything that night. I didn't fight back. I just picked up Amelia, held her close, and walked past them down the hall to our room. But as I lay awake in the darkness, my daughter sleeping beside me, I whispered a promise to myself. They would regret it. Every last word. Days passed, but the venom lingered. My parents strutted around the house like they owned it, slamming doors, leaving messes, criticizing me as if it were their full-time job. They didn't pay a cent toward bills. They didn't lift a finger to help. And every time I passed them in the hallway, I could still hear my father's voice echoing in my skull, "You and your kid are just freeloaders." But I didn't confront them. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Instead, I planned. Quietly. Patiently. I started with the bills. My name was the only one on the mortgage, on the utilities, on everything. They had no legal claim to this house. It was mine, and mine alone. But I didn't want to simply kick them out. No, that would be too easy. Too merciful. I wanted them to feel what it meant to lose everything. So I began setting traps. Little ones at first. I stopped buying their favorite groceries. I canceled the cable subscription they lived for. I cut down the Wi-Fi bandwidth so their endless TV binges would freeze and buffer, just to see the frustration build in their faces. And then I started recording. Every insult. Every cruel word. Every tantrum. My phone became my weapon, capturing their venom in crisp audio. Freeloader. Pathetic. Useless. I collected it all, a library of their hate. Proof. Ammunition. Meanwhile, I contacted a lawyer. I learned my rights. I learned how eviction worked. I learned that my parents had no ground to stand on. They were squatters in the house I owned, and all I needed to do was pull the trigger. But I wasn't going to do it quietly. No. I wanted them to feel it. The night it happened was like a scene from a film. Rain battered the windows, lightning lit up the sky, and the house itself seemed to tremble. I walked into the living room where they sat, side by side, glaring at me like vultures. Amelia was asleep in her room, safe, oblivious. I stood there in silence for a moment, just letting the storm outside mirror the storm inside me. And then I pulled out my phone. You know, I said softly, I've been thinking a lot about that night. My father snorted. What night? The night you screamed in my face. Called me and my daughter freeloaders. My mother rolled her eyes. Oh, get over it. You're too sensitive. I smiled. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. And then I pressed play. Their voices filled the room. Raw. Cruel. Ugly. Every insult, every word of hate, echoing back at them from the tiny speaker in my hand. The color drained from their faces. My father's jaw dropped. My mother stammered, Where did you get that? You gave it to me, I said coldly. Every time you opened your mouth. Every time you decided to spit on me and my daughter. You gave me everything I need. My father stood up, his fists shaking. You can't. Oh, but I can, I cut him off. My voice was steady, sharper than it had ever been. I own this house. Every bill, every paper, every nail in these walls is mine. And you? You're nothing. You're squatters. Parasites. And as of tomorrow morning, you'll be gone. Their faces twisted in shock, in rage, in disbelief. My mother gasped, You wouldn't dare. I leaned in, so close I could smell the fear in their breath. Watch me. The next morning, I filed the eviction. But I didn't stop there. I sent the recordings to my siblings, to family friends, to anyone who ever thought my parents were saints. I wanted the world to hear the truth. I wanted their reputations to crumble under the weight of their own words. And when the sheriff came weeks later, when my parents were dragged out of the house they thought they controlled, I stood in the doorway with Amelia holding my hand. My father spat curses. My mother sobbed. But I didn't flinch. Because justice wasn't loud. Justice was watching them carry their bags out into the rain, no roof, no control, no power. Justice was hearing Amelia whisper, Are they gone, Mommy, and being able to answer, with certainty. Yes. They'll never hurt us again. And as the door closed behind them, the silence returned. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It wasn't suffocating. It was peace. The kind of peace that only comes when the people who tried to destroy you finally taste the bitterness of their own poison. And that night, as I tucked Amelia into bed, I kissed her forehead and whispered the words I had been waiting to say for years. They called us freeloaders, baby. But tonight, we're free.